Today we will actually start the session with a keynote speech by Mr. Nicolae Ștefănuță, a member of the European Parliament, and it will be followed up by a panel discussion. So I would like to take this opportunity to welcome him, as well as welcome Mrs. Markéta Gregorova, member of the European Parliament from the Czech Republic, who is also accompanying us today. Thank you very much for both of you coming. To present Mr. Nicolae Ștefănuță, member of the European Parliament. He's from the group of the Greens and the European Free Alliance, and he's an MEP representing Romania. Mr. Ștefănuță is a full member of the Committee on Budgets, the Subcommittee on Public Health, and the Delegation for Relations with the United States. He is also a substitute member of the ENVI Committee and the delegation to the EU-Moldova Parliamentary Association Committee. He is dedicated to positive change in the lives of European citizens with multiple roles in the European Parliament, including lead rapporteur on the budget of the European Union for 2023 and actively involved in promoting health, protecting the environment, and fighting climate change. His studies in economics and international relations at Georgetown University and the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna, as well as over 16 years of experience in European institutions, help him meet the challenges of today's world. That stated, Mr. Ștefănuță, we welcome you to the pulpit for your keynote speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You made a very nice presentation of myself, but it almost doesn't sound like me. The thing I'm most proud of from what you said, and it wasn't there in your speech actually, is that I'm Romania's first Green member of the European Parliament. That is important to me, but also to Romania in a sense, because real green politics has not been made in Romania outside the NGOs that are in the room. The green politics of Romania has been done by NGOs, and we have to say that, and has been done by young people. It hasn't been done by politicians. It hasn't been done by the government. So it almost was done in spite of politics and not thanks to politics. And that is a problem. And I had a speech prepared, obviously, on the focusing on climate justice, but also on EU action. But I also want to adapt it to what the room is. The room is full of young people, and you have an amazing concept. I love the game on concept. I love the gamification process. I love the energy, and I would like to also thank the young people who have traveled from where I'm from Transylvania in Romania. Sziasztok, bine ați venit, hello. We are a multinational community and a very attached community to the environment. I want to tell you a story so that you just understand that change is possible within a lifetime or even a shorter period. In 2019, when I became an MEP, we had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Romania at that time. You can Google who it was. And all the 33 MEPs from Romania were sitting around the table, and we were discussing about the Green Deal and climate change. And the Prime Minister and pretty much everyone at the table said it's a conspiracy from the West to kill the industry of the East. And that was the consensus. My blood pressure rose quite a lot during that discussion. And I stood up and I said, Mr. Prime Minister, the Green Deal is not about that. It's about an urgent necessity. And also, by the way, it will happen whether you like it or not. So we might as well be on the winning side. We might as well profit from it. We might as well learn from it and grow from it. Then came the pandemic in 2020. And the same politicians who were so happy to kill it in 2019 jumped on the Green Deal and said, now we have to kill it because we have other priorities. It's the pandemic, everything's off the table, forget about the Green Deal. And again, then we had to say, well, wouldn't it be better for the health of the population if we had the Green Deal? Wouldn't it be better for marginalized groups if we did have a Green Deal? Would it be amazing for the health of the population to have less polluted cities, hence less respiratory diseases, hence less deaths from COVID. And then in 2020, this is not over, by the way. In 2022 came the war on Ukraine. And the same discussion was open again. Well, now that we have the war, shouldn't we put to the side all these green ambitions because we have the war? And even then, we managed to win the argument and say, no, it's good to continue on the Green Deal because it's also a strategy for the Union. If you change strategy every year, it's not a strategy anymore. So actually, I'm very happy that I got to live through this mandate where we had the Green Deal. When I was elected, I was speaking about environmental topics a lot and climate change, but I didn't expect that we would do so much progress as a union, to be honest. And I think we have to fight for this progress, to be present in the next mandate as well, in the next legislature, because it's under threat. And I want to tell you, and this is my political message for the day, don't fall for the trap that says it was too much green stuff during this mandate, and this is why the extreme right grew. No, it is actually, it hasn't been even sufficient how much green it has been during this mandate, and we have to continue because the threat hasn't gone away. The threat of climate change hasn't been alleviated. Now I'll tell you another anecdote. When I was a child in Sibiu, where I'm from, my mother used to say, on days that were above 30 degrees Celsius, you are not allowed to go out. You have to stay in the apartment, in the block of flats where I was living. Now, the 30 degrees has become 40 degrees. You keep your children inside when it's 40 outside. Isn't that crazy that in the space, I'm not even that old, in the space of 20, 30 years, this has happened? I mean, it's visible with the naked eye, and the climate anxiety is an issue, and I know that a lot of the young people face that. I'm also a father. My daughter is 3 years old, and I do a simple math. 2050, when we say we want to achieve these climate goals with 50%, climate neutrality and so on, it's the age when she will be 30 years old. 2100, by which there are all these calculations about the world heating by more than 2 degrees, etc. She will be 80 if she gets there, and I hope she does. So it's all within a generation. That's why the urgency is there. That's why the urgency is very clear. I want to say something. You have to stand up for yourself. We talk about climate injustice, about climate anxiety. Anxiety is very high, by the way. I also deal with mental health, and I see it in young people. Pandemic has been devastating also for mental health, but also climate anxiety is something that is very, very pertinent. I was at a festival this weekend. It's called Trifoi in Bucharest. It's a festival for sustainability. And there was a psychologist who said she's talking to many young people about climate anxiety, about feelings of guilt towards the planet, things like that. So these are real issues, and you need to stand up for yourself and make a political voice, make a political statement out there. Why? You might say politics is, the word, and you want to do your work from NGOs, and that's perfectly fine. However, politics does decide about your future, whether you like it or not. And politicians treat you as stakeholders. You were present in the vote, you count. You were not present in the vote, you don't count. It's as simple as that. It's almost like an investment, right? A vote that somebody casts, it's an investment in a party, and the party knows that you voted for me, or you didn't vote, or you voted for somebody else. And they behave exactly like that. If you voted, then I have an interest to represent you. If you didn't, you said, oh, politics is shit, then you don't count. That's as simple as that. And it's not a threat or anything like that. It's just an impulse to say, hey, this stuff really matters. And I'll give you two recent examples from the work that I do in the parliament. Nature restoration law. You probably have heard about nature restoration law. I hope you did, because it was a very important piece of legislation. So on the nature restoration law, the numbers were so tight in the European Parliament that we were almost sure to lose. And then we all started engaging NGOs and young people at home, making their voices heard. And you guys wrote to your MEPs and you said, hey, you know, we want the nature restoration law. We want that the cities are green and there's no net cutting of trees in the cities. I want to breathe fresh air in the cities. I want wildlife ecosystems to be restored. I want the Danube Delta to be protected. I want peatlands. I want, you know, the land not to be won by desertification. So because of that, we managed to win by about 10 votes. That's very little. That's very, very little, you know. On the key vote, the one that determined everything, the difference was 5. If the difference was another way, the final result would have been, the act would have fallen. So it's this razor sharp close, the battle. And last week in Strasbourg, 2 weeks ago, sorry, we managed to win another battle on air quality. I was responsible for the Green family for the air quality file. And on the air quality, you will be able to sue your local authorities if your air quality is bad, as it is in most big cities. And you can sue them and say, hey, I got sick because you didn't respect my air quality. And you are able to measure not only in parks and green areas as they do now, but where it's very busy. So these are all very big wins, but we are lucky that we have right now we have a majority that thinks like that. It's not clear that next year it will be the same. And now turning to some of the things that you asked me to speak, and I will be probably short another few minutes. How much do I have? 5 minutes? Good. I want to say that we have managed to do a lot of progress on forests, on the carbon border adjustment, because it's not okay that the union has all these climate legislation if we also don't pay attention to what's coming from China or from other places where they don't respect environmental legislation. So we have the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which I think is really good. We have transition funds, the just transition, you know, for the areas that have to make very big changes in order to give up fossil fuels. That is very, very good. The Just Transition Fund that we adopted and that the Parliament has increased. Now, many of you care a lot about the Global South. What do we do about the poorer nations of this planet? Because they are most in line to be affected by. And then just last week in Lampedusa, we had another wave of immigrants, and it will continue to be like that. The fact that we have a green climate fund is good, but it's insufficient. We have to also make sure that our policies and our free trade agreements or any relations that we have with the nations of the Global South have inside environmental concerns, and also a preoccupation for indigenous populations and for vulnerable groups. I can give you an example on a file that I worked on deforestation. Do you know imported deforestation? Have you heard about it? Yes. So on the imported deforestation, we had a president in Brazil before Lula who didn't care about the Amazon forest anymore, but not only in Brazil, in Indonesia and other places. There was a boom for cutting down forests to produce palm oil, coconut, all these products that we so much use in our daily consumption. And finally, through this imported deforestation regulation, we managed to put controls on it to stop products that come from deforested areas in the EU. And I think that was a big win for our fight on the international level, because just with the pandemic, we cannot start climate change on our own here at our home in the European Union. So obviously, you know, the EU participation in COPs, etc., is good, but it's not sufficient. I'm one of the people that Greta would say, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough. And she's right, we're not doing enough at this moment. But I think the few of us who are fighting need reinforcements. And I really would like you to leave from this room saying, I want to be a climate activist, but I want to also be part of the political sphere and really create politics for the future, you know, create politics for the 21st century, for my future, decide myself for my future. Once again, thank you for inviting me here today, and I'm very happy to participate in the discussions. You look like a beautiful, beautiful crowd. I'm reassured that the European Union's future is in good hands, but let's join forces to fight for climate, to fight for justice. Let's make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful speech. And now, usually we would have a few questions and answers with the keynote, but obviously he will also be a part of the next panel. For that, I would like to invite to join in the panel Mr. Kieran, Pradeep, and Ms. Borbála, Láng, as well as Lisa Kirtz, who will be our moderator and who will do the proper presentations. Please have a welcome to the full panel for today's discussion.
I happily take place between very interesting people that I'm looking forward to talking to you. And I welcome all of you to today's panel discussion on No One Left Behind, Adaptation for All in Times of Climate Change. But I can already tell you we'll not only stick to adaptation because we have very knowledgeable panelists here, so we can also broaden the thematic scope and also tackle aspects of mitigation, energy, loss and damage, climate finance, and also some legal aspects as well as differences within Europe and also the Global South. Before I introduce the panelists, let me shortly introduce myself. I think most of you already know me, so I keep it short, but just for maybe some people who weren't there yesterday, like two of our panelists. My name is Lisa Kirtz. I'm an advisor on climate justice and project coordinator of the German part of Game On for the Roma Initiative, which is a human rights NGO with a focus on Central America. That's also why our focus within Game On is mostly on climate justice and on bringing the voices of the Global South, mostly Central America, into the consortium and in general in the discussion about climate and climate change. So I'm very happy to discuss especially this aspect of who we have to take care of, that we don't leave them behind. How can we ensure that everyone is on board and can make their voice be heard when it comes to climate change? Now to our panelists. To my left, you see Ms. Borbála, who is a student of terrestrial ecology, which sounds very interesting, I think, from Romania. Bori has been active as a youth ambassador of the Game On project in several occasions, participating in climate conferences, the climate camp that we did in Guatemala last year, but also elaborating a podcast of herself, so active in many of the Game On activities, but also in general, Bori is passionate about sustainability issues, climate justice, permaculture, and brings her experience about differences within Europe, but also her experiences from other parts of the world, like the Global South and Central America. happy to have you on the panel. And to highlight that, Bodhi is especially brave. She jumped in because you might see that in the program we had another youth ambassador on the panel planned, but we could count on Bodhi to jump in and present or represent the voice of the youth on this panel. So thank you very much, especially for that, and give her a big applause for her bravery to jump in. To my left as well, you see Mr. Kieran Pradeep, who is a climate and energy justice campaigner for Friends of the Earth Europe and a coordinator of the European Right to Energy Coalition. So this is why we can also tackle the topic of mitigation and energy, having an expert on that. Kieran fights for the access to clean, affordable energy to be a basic right. So an applause for Kieran. Thank you for coming. To Mr. Nicolae Ştefănuță, I don't need to say that much. Thor already did my job. Thanks for that. That's great. Maybe just to highlight the points that why I especially value having you on the panel. You already mentioned some of them. Is you, well, first of all, being a member of the European Parliament, so being able to speak from this political perspective. Then, as you told me earlier, being the money guy, that's definitely a relevant topic that we'll also talk about. One point that I'm not sure if you mentioned, but I found quite interesting, being in the delegation for relations with the United States of America, which definitely on climate negotiations is a very important actor as well. So maybe we can also come to that. And you focus on public health, and of course climate change are definitely valuable aspects to bring to the discussion here. So welcome also to you. First, I will start with one-on-one conversations with each of you, so both you and me can get to know our panelists a bit better. If during that time you already have questions that arise that you would like to ask them later, please write them down. There will be space for that at the end. And I'm sure they'll be very happy to also take your questions and not only be interviewed by me. Then I have some questions for all three of them, but also I would like to give you the possibility to ask some questions to each other if you have, so please bear that in mind as well. And like I said, finally, we will open the floor for questions that you might have. But before starting with the one-on-one, I think it's always nice to give each of you the possibility to not only sit here for like 10-15 minutes and wait to be able to have your voice heard. So I would very briefly, in 3 words, like to ask you, leaving no one behind, who is it that we should not leave behind? Which group, which individuals? You can name 3 without further explanations for now. We might be able to come back to that later. But for now, which 3 groups or individuals do you think we should not leave behind, or which are in the risk of us leaving them behind? I will start because this one was a surprise for all of you. I think you are the one who's most experienced having to answer right away. So I would like to start with you. Which 3 group do you think we should not leave behind?
I don't think we should leave behind the older generations. Why? Because it's perhaps easier to make the point on climate change for the young, but overall society will decide with the vote of everyone. And trying to explain climate change and our policies to the older generations, I think, is key. I often use the lens of health with the older people because they relate better, and with life quality, etc. But I don't think we should leave the older generations behind. They are often parked at the side of society, pensioners especially. I had an intern who was a pensioner. I had a senior internship in my office, and she said, and I quote, pensioners are treated as if they are on an antechamber of death, like a waiting room for the death. And that's unfortunately correct. We have to really take them on board, involve them, make them part of our fight.
Okay, for the other two, I would like, well, my idea was to have you mention 3 groups, but not explaining. Since you did explain, I'm only going to leave it with this one group. For the 2 of you, which 3 group, without explaining, we'll have time to discuss later, which 3 group do you think we have to keep in mind to not forget, to not leave them behind?
Okay. So to that, I would add the marginalized communities and everyone who is in need, and also indigenous people. To that come also the Roma people, to mention them also.
Thank you. Kieran, who do you think we should add to that list?
Okay, I'll try and say it in just 3 words. Everyone but billionaires.
Thank you very much. Bodhi, I would like to start with you. Leaving no one behind has a lot to do with climate justice. What is climate justice to you?
It should be a hard question. It is actually. And for me, climate justice, I didn't know about climate justice before I joined the Game On, so I haven't heard of it. And it's really interesting that, I don't know, for 20 years I haven't really knew about it. And for me, it would be that we should live in a community where everyone would count as a member of the community. So this is climate justice, to take everyone in, and everything also, like also nature.
Thank you. When we talked before, you mentioned that you see quite some differences between Eastern and Western Europe when it comes to climate in many aspects, how it's seen on a political, societal level, the needs and so on. Could you elaborate a bit on that? Which differences do you see between Eastern and Western Europe, to stay within our continent boundaries for now?
I can see the difference between how people are seeing climate change and how they are trying to act, like the way of their acting. And I see that in the Western countries, people are more aware of the climate change and climate justice, and they are trying to act on it. And in the Eastern countries, they have more other problems like poverty and marginalized communities. And I think that's why they are not really focused on climate change and adaptation, because they are not really aware, and they also have other problems. And I can talk about biodiversity, the differences in biodiversity also, because that's my study field. And I can see that we, in the Eastern countries, we still have biodiversity, but we are not aware of it. So we are not really, the main average is not really trying to somehow save it.
And what makes people like you and the other young ambassadors that we have from most of you Eastern European countries be active then, despite the maybe less favorable conditions than in Western European countries?
Because you have to fight, I don't know. Because as I mentioned, we have a beautiful biodiversity and it's really thriving, and I'm glad I was born in Romania to see that, because now I can see how it slowly disappears. And this is really, really like heartbreaking. And for that, because I can see this, for that I am really, I feel the urge to do something.
Is this also part of the role that you would see the youth responsible for? What do you see as the role of youth regarding climate justice?
To achieve something, I think the first most important thing would be to be okay with yourself, and I think that's the most important thing for you to go outside and to experience nature and to experience themselves as well, so that they can feel like home in nature.
Did experience you gathered within Game On, as I said, you were and still are a very active part of Game On. Did experiences that you gathered within Game On influence you in this activism, or which experiences do you have particularly strong in mind?
Yeah, as I said, it's really important to go out in nature, so the wilderness camp were really helpful with that, and I can feel that in the Game On we could make a community. We slowly became a community, and it's really the main base would be to act like a community, as I said before.
Sounds like everyone involved did a good job if we managed to form such a community. Since some of you have also gone to Central America, did we manage to expand this community also to there? What experiences, insights, thoughts did this journey and the exchange with people from Central America give to you?
For me, the communication is key to communicate everything, and it was really a chance for me to talk to other young activists also from South America and Central America, and it's really opened my mind, because now I feel privileged as a European citizen, and with that I could see that I am privileged, but I don't need to help them. It's controversial, but they don't need help. They just need, you have to acknowledge their struggles. That's what they need, to be acknowledged, to be seen, and to maybe if they ask, we can help them, but they just need our to stand by them.
Sounds like very wise words. Maybe I would understand from your words that, of course, we have to, and it's wise to align the battles that we have to fight against climate change in different parts of the earth. But of course, as Europeans, we can most easily focus on our activities here. So on a political level, what would be your demands to the EU, taking the advantage of having a representative here who can take your voice into the decision-making spaces?
In Central America, I could see that there is an NGO, I think, ACERE, if I know right, and they brought seeds to the communities, indigenous communities, and I think this was a really good step to start from somewhere, and I think that in Europe, marginalized communities also would need knowledge and some more money. I don't know how, but yeah. But first, knowledge about how they could produce their food and the tools for that.
Thank you very much. I think there were already a lot of very interesting points that we can come back to later. Kieran, I would next like to go to you and focus a bit on energy justice. Could you maybe briefly explain what you understand under energy justice? Because I think it's a term that maybe not everyone is very familiar with.
Okay, thank you very much. It's my favorite topic. So I think for too long, when we think of concepts like energy or energy justice or energy poverty, people we're fighting against common sense. So common sense says that when it's cold, you wear a jumper because you don't want to waste too much money or things like that. Common sense says things like this is just a natural state of being. So I think for too long we've accepted that homes are sometimes cold when you're poor, that sometimes it's on us to kind of cut our usage when we don't have enough to actually meet the needs that we have to keep ourselves and our families warm, safe, or adequately cool when it's too hot. You mentioned 30 degrees creep, and it's now 40 degrees creep, and one day we don't know where it's going to end up. So what we need to understand in terms of energy justice is that energy is inherently political. It's not an abstract, kind of boring or gray, economic function. And a lack of energy or a lack of adequate heat, light, or ability to cool your home is not an individual failing. It's a structural failing, and it's caused by austerity. It's caused by shit jobs and precarious work. It's caused by regressive electricity pricing. It's caused by ruinous fixed charges that target people with the lowest incomes proportionately the most. It's caused by a whole host of kind of economic inequalities and social injustices that compound on each other to kind of make people sick, to make people unhappy and unwell mentally, and to kind of show up in this almost invisible way as just something that's natural and accepted. So, we have streetlights outside that are publicly funded. We made a decision once that was, public, but on the inside, we have children that are being disconnected from the grid because their parents maybe cannot pay an electricity bill. So we're actually accepting a cost in society that, we'll have families, children, elderly people, people with medical needs, such as diabetics who need to refrigerate insulin, or people on dialysis, with serious medical conditions who have to accept, this very social necessity as an increasingly ruinous cost with rising bills, given our over-reliance on fossil fuels to actually provide the energy that we need. So that is one element of energy justice. I think the other one is the global dimension. So, energy is never just local. So whether it's from gas extraction and LNG in unceded tribal lands in kind of Canada or North America or Australia, to the LNG export terminals, which are built on, say the Gulf of Mexico, on heavily racialized communities with high cancer rates, or, in Bolivia with the extraction of lithium, that is maybe being done with little to no heed for the local people that live there or kind of their environment. It's all being used to kind of fund our energy needs and our transition, and ultimately to kind of, fuel our wealth extraction. So that's kind of the complex web of things that I'm trying to unpack from energy justice. So I'll leave it there because I know that I'll probably run away with this.
Thank you very much for this bunch of very interesting and important aspects within energy justice. I would like to jump on one of the parts you mentioned in the second half, being the source of energy and where it comes from. I think we would all agree that everyone should have access to the energy they need. But then thinking about climate change, the energy source is very relevant. how do you think we can get to this part of the not only energy being available, but clean sources of energy? Which ways do you see for reaching this aim?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a very big question, which I'll try and answer very succinctly. So, like, first, we need, so much of our energy is wasted because European homes are leaky, moldy, and unsafe. So, buildings are a huge driver of the continent's emissions. Like, we see the fight over the Buildings Directive, the EPBD right now is kind of running into like lots of political headwind and difficulty because of the cost of that renovation. But like that is a meaningful and structural way out of a lot of wasted energy. So like that's like one step. Another one is a massive subsidized rollout of access to renewable sources to kind of replace our reliance on a fossil fuel system that we've seen drive war, inequality, and climate catastrophe. And so what we see right now is a risk of a two-tier energy transition where people who have upfront, capital and wealth can buy, a solar panel for their home, or they can buy, a heat pump, and or buy kind of the renovations that they need to make their home cheaper to live in, and then kind of accrue the costs, whilst we see people with no upfront, money or capital, locked in to kind of maybe heavily subsidized gas boilers, which are cheap, at cost, but which ultimately will cost us, a lot more than, the earth at the end of the day. So like there's like a lot of kind of things that we can do there in terms of kind of the phase out of gas, the equitable distribution and kind of funding of efficiency and kind of deep renovations for homes, and in providing a subsidized access for renewables to kind of make the energy transition truly just. So I'll leave it there, but there's a lot more.
Talking about justice, having to do with laws as well, with lawsuits, do you think lawsuits like the ones against Shell and other climate justice processes we have seen can play a role in that as well?
Yes, very much. So I think like one of the big lessons that came out of the Shell case was they were found to have responsibility. So like they were found to have a responsibility for reducing climate emissions. And this is a gas and oil company that has promised its shareholders in the past to kind of just keep pumping until, the profits dry up. And like, so, like how can we have climate ambition and climate targets on the one hand, when like one of our flagship, EU kind of companies, which has like a lot of influence and a lot of power, especially in Brussels, is kind of committed to shareholder value in this way. So, it's us versus them. So like the court case proved without a doubt that, they have a responsibility to tackle climate change. And this is really important for two reasons, because the industry likes to say that it's up to governments to regulate. So, they're like, oh, we would do more, but, states, just don't put enough constraints around us, which maybe it's the other way around. And then the second one is, if we didn't do it, someone worse would come in, so a competitor from another block. But at the same time, the courts found that those competitors would also have the same, obligations. So like, I think, these are important things to establish.
Thank you very much. For you as well, the same question is for Bori. Which one would be your most urgent demand to the EU institution when it comes to climate justice?
Okay, this is really hard. So I guess like for the coming winter, my demand would be for the EU Council and the Electricity Market Directive redesign to prioritize banning disconnections. So kind of what we want to see is just an outright end to people getting their electricity and heat cut off when they can no longer pay. We don't want to see debts piling up that are unpayable. So like that's in an emergency sense, you know, after the freezing winters that we've seen, you know, like this is like a false economy, and it's, you know, asking people that don't have the ability to pay exorbitant bills to pay what they can't pay. So, you know, like we need to break that system, and this is one of the first, I guess, like practical steps. On the longer term, it's going to be about money, and it's going to be about breaking up the power of the oil and gas industry. So I think maybe there are better voices in this panel to outline how we'll do that.
Mhm. Thank you very much. That's exactly the voice I want to turn to now. But before talking about finance, you started off mentioning youth and the very important role of youth. Yesterday in the panel we heard, and also in the discussion and a survey that was done, that partly for youth it's difficult to stay positive, to have the energy to keep on fighting, because we see that action is not happening fast enough. How do you re-motivate them? What do you tell to young people that it is worth to keep on the fight despite it being a long and hard one?
I think quite honestly that just saying is not enough. And I will tell you what, this is perhaps beyond the subject of today's work, but I see there's more issues of justice regarding the youth than just the climate aspect. For instance, there's a huge crisis in living quarters, apartments. There's just a study that has come out that youth are no longer able to move away from their parents just after the age of 30 because they don't afford, there's not enough social housing, everything's expensive. So it's very, very hard. In the same thing, in the summer, there was another study from the Erasmus Student Network. I don't know if, are there any Erasmus students in here? Former, future? Mm-hmm. So Erasmus, for instance, that's a matter of social justice that I'm fighting for. I have a campaign called Erasmus Equality. And Erasmus scholarships are so low that people cannot afford the basic necessities, speaking of energy poverty, by the way, that only those people who have money from their parents can go in an Erasmus. And that becomes a discrimination in itself, because what about the kids who don't have the money from their parents? So there's so many social justice questions right now that, of course, we can not only say to the young people, keep fighting. We have to offer some responses. And coming to the topic of today, I really think, for instance, for the energy market, you know, for people renovating their homes and things like that to save on money, if we don't have a massive subsidy program, it's not going to work. There's the renovation wave ongoing, and that's very good. There's a huge debate on heat pumps in Germany that almost brought down the current government. It's extremely complicated. If we don't have the public sector intervening and helping with subsidies, it won't work. But subsidies in this field work. And I give an example. I will keep referring about Romania because in the eyes of many in the room, Romania is not a very green-minded country, but I believe that it is. It is, just not at the level of politics right now. It's at the level of the public. They adapt quicker than politicians. When we had a program on photovoltaic panels, all the panels were gone within 3 minutes of launching. 3 minutes, that's all it stayed online. So there's an appetite from people. Because I always say this, people are not in love with gas or with petroleum. They're in love with comfort, correct? So if you can ensure comfort, or at least a good living situation, by replacing the harmful element and by making it interesting also economically, people are going to switch. My parents are not in love with gas. They don't care at all about gas. They like to have some heat in the house, basically. So it doesn't matter where it comes from.
Having a warm house is certainly a good base for staying healthy. Talking about health and climate change, which aspects, other than mental health that you already mentioned a bit, do you already see or do you fear might affect us in Europe and also internationally?
Lack of equality is a big issue, inequality. And when I say that, in Romania, there's a big city called Cluj, Colozsvár. And it's very rich. It's richer and richer every year. But that also drives through huge inequalities. There's people who can afford Cluj and people who cannot afford Cluj. And right next to Cluj, there's a community, speaking about the Roma rights, called Patarât, on which people live. You know, it's the apocalypse on so many levels. It's an environmental apocalypse because it's a former but not disaffected trash dump. It's a racist apocalypse because it's mostly Roma people living there who have been dislocated from the main city of Cluj. It's a social issue because they live in horrible situations and they don't have money. So it's like everything, the worst scenarios combined in one. And that's just, you know, right across from a hill called Borhanj, which is the Beverly Hills of Cluj, which is like the richest, where the rich and famous live. So inequality is a very, very bad factor, not one that's meant to create a good societal ambience and understanding. I think that's one of the greatest dangers for us right now.
And what are there already health problems related to climate change that you see, for example, in this environment?
Yes, for sure. The number, I mean, respiratory diseases are up. 30,000 deaths a year are linked to air pollution and to respiratory diseases just in my country. Around 300,000 in Europe as a whole. The life expectancy of my population is about 10 years lower than the one of Spain, for instance. So there are many, on the one hand, nobody computes the cost into the GDP. Everybody says, you know, the GDP is that much and we have this growth this year. Romania, by the way, has top 3 growth in Europe, economic growth. But nobody looks at the side of the real costs in terms of years of living, quality of life, health, things like that. Nobody computes that in any formula.
Mm-hmm. I think another very important aspect that should be added into this formula is participation. Who has the possibility to participate in decision making? I'm thinking especially of the example you mentioned and the Roma community. And I think that's probably a question I can address to all of you. How could we improve the participation and having a voice of all people in Europe, especially the ones that don't have their voice heard so much, be it on a political level, within youth programs and group, and in general society, and have their voice be magnified to be heard on international or national and EU levels. So this question is to all of you, whoever wants to answer first. Be my guest.
Okay. I'm from the generation of the social media. So I think that creating a forum where people can share their experiences would be really great, but an accessible forum, like not just social media, because in Romania, the example, it's not really accessible for everyone. I don't think that on Patarât there is a computer in every house or telephone. So we would, it would be important to raise awareness and to create this space for talking.
Do you have, I would like to stick to that a bit, like very concrete. Do you have any ideas on what space, where, how could people be brought together and be made aware of the situation?
schools, probably. I remember that we had a big room in our school where sometimes people from some initiatives and organizations came and talked about stuff. So this could be probably but of course not everyone is in schools, like the example in Romania. So would be better if we would somehow reach every young people and every children and bring them to schools.
A very important additional topic. Kieran and Nicolae, would any one of you want to add about the participation, having the voice heard aspect?
Yeah, sure. So like I think participation and I guess questions of democracy are really important because I guess the governing principle or institution of our lives as Europeans is sadly the market. You know, like the market is coming in to, you know, stand for, you know, this like kind of like natural force that we have nothing and can do nothing about, essentially. So that, you know, it's like a global phenomenon. It's not, but essentially, all economics aside, it's also an offshoring of accountability and a concentration of power amongst those people that have market power. And so when we talk about participation and how we can actually have a say over things like how our energy is maybe produced or priced, we have to then think about kind of collective institutions. So if you're in energy poverty, people are fighting back and kind of organizing together from the grassroots. So there's the Alliance Against Energy Poverty in Spain and Catalonia. And collectively, households have managed to bring some energy companies to heel in Catalonia, win a ban on disconnections in the form of, if a social worker says a family is vulnerable, they can't be disconnected. And they've won a funding pot from those companies to kind of deal with unpayable energy debt. And so like that's like a victory for you know, collective institutions, a victory for ordinary people. And it's happening, you know, right now in a region of Europe. So I think we have like other forms of participation. So in Central and Eastern Europe, we have, you know, very distinctive apartment blocks where owner-occupiers of these buildings, you know, they became owner-occupiers in the 90s during like a period of economic tumult. But because of the scale and size of the overall building involved, they don't have the democratic or collective institutions to maintain those buildings. And so there needs to be, you know, a state actor or someone there, because families alone cannot maintain off their own backs what used to be the purview of like the welfare state. And so like, you know, when we're talking about home renovations and kind of concrete solutions to energy poverty, there are collective, you know, institutions that are needed to be implemented in this level. And then finally, just before I close, we need to think about what makes people visible to be even heard in the European conversation. So that's about kind of like what indicators or what measurements are being used to actually measure whether there is a problem or not. So in Northern Ireland, where I grew up, when we talk about the traveler community in the same way, the same situation as the Roma in your country, and they, I think, spend around 50% of their income every month on energy. You know, they are by every metric, you know, the most energy poor demographic in the United Kingdom, but there's no targeted support for them because, you know, energy poverty is like usually calculated by, you know, your household expenditure, whether you have a house, kind of things like that. So, you know, we see the people who are the most vulnerable are actually invisible. And so like that is a huge problem as a starting point for participation.
I think about having the right indicators, you would certainly agree, if I'm not mistaken. I was wondering if about the first part, that it's rather the market ruling Europe than the political decisions, if you would agree about that as well, being from the political side.
Yes, there is this reputation of the European Union that it's very market-driven, etc. But I think recently politics has been more social, hopefully at least, and I hope we intend to keep it that way. I have a thing about young people participation. You have a deadly weapon that the older generations don't have, and those are memes, or at least memes. You are better at social media. That's it's a stupid comment to make, okay? But it matters. Why? Because politicians start to notice that it's important to rule social media, to be present on social media, even for older generations, like Facebook. So I give you an example. The school started, and there were free journeys by train, supposed to be, by law, agreed by the government in July. And when September came, the train company said, oh, we don't have implementation decisions, etc., so we don't give you free tickets. What did the young people do? They blasted the internet, they memed, they protested. They went to the train station in Bucharest and protested. And that was effective. They backed off. They backed off because of the pressure, So I don't think youth participation is dead. On the contrary, I think it's there, and it's smart, and it's witty, and it's funny, and it's on social media. So use the instruments you have, use the tools you have, use the deadly weapon of memes, use everything you have. Use TikTok, use Instagram, and that's how you can really achieve major change in society.
Talking about changes that need to be done, I would like to widen our horizon once more to an international sphere, to include also the view towards the global south. And I was wondering which aspects of leaving no one behind, of climate justice, do you consider especially relevant? The aspects we mostly hear, or the categories, let's say, and some of them we already talked about a bit, are age, gender, geographic location, ability, ethnicity, to just name a few. Which ones do you consider most relevant from your experience, the areas you work in, to achieve climate justice and moving towards a more sustainable and climate just future? Question to all of you.
Okay, I would say women, and that's it for now.
Would you explain a bit why?
Yeah, I think that women in general are in a harder, they have a harder work at home in some like conservative role, family roles. So they have to clean the house, they have to be everything in the house, also raising the children, and also cooking for the man, and also be the psychiater at home, and also the chef at the home, and also the cleaner. So I think they would need more tools to do that if they are really their goal is to achieve achieve this role and be fulfill their life in this role, or be able to step outside of this role.
Thank you. How about the other two?
So just in terms of like who we don't leave behind.
Yeah, on a global scale, like which kind of like criteria, or I guess criteria we should keep in mind, because we've talked quite a bit about Europe, which is great and which is where we can most easily be active. But thinking about the global south, which aspects do you consider most relevant?
Yeah, so I guess like with the global south, it's like, so climate change is real and catastrophic and it's like happening right now. So, you know, you have whether it's like catastrophic floods or unprecedented heat, there's been like a litany of, you know, I think like every day since 2020 started, you know, like something has been on fire. So, you know, whether it was like the Amazon, whether it was Australia, you know, like no country is exempt from this. So right now we have the global south kind of in this weird situation where they are rich. Like Africa is like one of the richest continents on the planet. Like Latin America is rich, but they're like rich in resources that we want. And so like we need to maybe start valuing the people that live there, their sovereignty, and kind of, I guess, you know, maybe forgive a lot of the debts. I think we need to understand that in Europe right now, when we think of things like immigration, this is also kind of like bound up in climate. So when we look at like the crimes that are happening in the Mediterranean right now, there's a lot of instability that is being driven by kind of our foreign policies in recent years, but which will only be exacerbated by climate change. So we've got to think about climate change as a huge multiplier of all the vulnerabilities that our economics and kind of web of kind of supply and demand that we currently, you know, are sitting on top of is kind of driving across the world. So I think having that kind of justice perspective is probably a good starting point.
I think finance is definitely a very important point when talking about the global south and climate. You being the finance guy within the EU, what has been done and what do you think still needs to be done to move towards a more climate just world in the international sense of it?
I think the mantra was, don't give us money, give us development, no? So it's important to respect that mantra, but maybe give us sustainable development is very important. I think just like in the pandemic, there is no solution that is continent-based. In the pandemic, we were asked to help all other continents with our rich resources that we had in Europe, so that we end the pandemic at the same time. So it's impossible to end the pandemic only on one continent or only in one country. And just as impossible to end climate change only in one continent or only in one country. And development is linked to ending the climate change fight. And I see a problem in the sense that China has moved in a lot of the global south, let's say, and they are not interested at the moment to end climate change and alleviate poverty and conditions for the people, just to lock them in, basically. So I think Europe really has a duty to be global. I don't think in a Europe that's insular and separated. We have a duty to fight climate change together with developing nations and assisting them financially. I know you keep referring to me as the money guy. And as the money guy, for instance, we always put money for health a lot during the pandemic, a lot of money for the global south, because we just didn't think it was correct that only we have the medicines and what it takes. The same we have to do on the climate change. We have to pump as much as we do here outside, because by ourselves we won't solve the crisis.
Thank you very much. I was thinking already before that probably we'd be a panel of quite like-minded panelists, and normally it's the contradictions that make a panel interesting. So I was wondering which points we might not agree. We already had a little bit on the market or political power, who's ruling Europe. But then I thought, I mean, I don't necessarily have to be the one who is coming up with possible contradictory points. So I wanted to use the collective intelligence of all four of us. Do you have any ideas or suspicions on what points you might contradict with one another? I think if you have an idea in mind, you can start already, Kieran.
Yeah, I think like maybe like one fault line is just around, I guess, like the EU. It I think is often like a question of like competency over direction. So it's like different parts of the EU will propose the things that they have the ability to actually enact. So like when we talk about tax justice or kind of like debt relief or things like this, you know, like obviously these will be more fought by the council side of things as infringing on national sovereignty. But as a collective institution, you know, the EU is very fond of like regulation and kind of, you know, market mechanisms. And then like I think this leads to quite a lot of regressive social policy, you know, in the form of like, say, we have a social climate fund that's meant to fund our, you know, the social costs of the green transition, but it was only given like, you know, I think around like 80 billion euros in the end. And Germany in 1 year to get through one winter has spent like 250 billion just to deal with the cost of the gas prices. So there's kind of like this ambition gap between, I guess, the states, which have huge inequalities within them, within the states and, you know, between them, and what the EU overall is able to marshal in terms of the scale of the ambition needed. So like, I think that's maybe like a fault line there. I think one thing that seems to be embedded into the EU right now is climate change is a cost. It's a social cost, and social spending is entering the picture to mitigate it. When what we need, and like I think this may be something we agree on, is climate change to be seen as an investment in the future. So as you mentioned in your Green Deal kind of anecdotes at your keynote, like I thought that was very good.
Were there any points you would contradict to or you agree?
I disagree with Kilian on the importance of the council as a member of the European Parliament. No, but I'm totally in agreement with the need for social investment. 80 billion is nothing, because we need to, if we really want, for instance, ETS2, I don't want to bore you with details, but do you know what ETS2 is? No, obviously. So it's a system of emission trading, which is also going to apply to buildings, for instance. Most probably after 2029, there's a whole lot of legislation. So buildings, your block of flats in which you live creates emissions. How do you stop that? How do you change that? How do you renovate that? And for that purpose, this fund that Kieran mentioned was created, so that people adjust their emissions coming from their own houses. Is that enough? No, because he said 80 versus 250 billion in Germany alone. It's a big sum. It's a big sum to be bridged, and we're gonna get there. And I think Europe will keep the focus in changing and becoming more green and sustainable with cities, but it needs a lot more money for it than it's foreseen right now. And I think that's the biggest challenge we face right now.
I'm quite sure there are some additional challenges or also aspects the audience would like to ask. So I would like to open. So I would like to open the floor to the public to see if you have any questions. Thor, could you go? Yeah, great, around with the microphone. Maybe we collect, I saw 2 questions, maybe we collect them and then we see who answers.
Should I stand up? Or, okay.
There was a nod behind you, so yeah, I think people would be happy to see who's asking. And if you could present yourself briefly before asking a question, that would be great as well.
Hi, I'm Theodore, one of the young ambassadors. I'm from Germany. And my question goes to all of you. Nicolae, you said that people care not generally about gas or petroleum, but about comfort. Recently, I read a study that said that, or like that looked at good living conditions and said that globally we could cut back 60% of emissions and of critical pollution and emissions, and we would still all be able to live comfortably, live a good life. And I looked at those requirements and at the necessities that were included within those 60% lesser. I would love to live like that. They had all the basic necessities, social care, everything, and that the most important part of that was that the global south was included, the poorest countries were included, and it was still overall 60% less globally. But that would only work if we were to focus not on GDP and growth anymore, but to focus on justice and reducing inequality. And my question goes to all of you: if you think that we can fight the climate crisis and the injustices we are facing, if we can even fight that within our current system of growth-focused, GDP-focused capitalism, or if you think we need something else.
A very good question, not only in my point of view, but I saw silently applauding hands behind you. So you found a good question. I'm curious to hear the answers from the panelists, but I'm first gonna collect the second question there was from the first row, and then I'm happy to hear your answers.
Hi, my name is Svetlana, Youth Ambassador for Bulgaria. My question is the role of business and the role of lobbying in this topic, since it is quite crucial, and I would like to hear your touching up on it. Thank you. Well, it's a question to everybody who wants to comment.
Thank you very much. Then I'll leave the floor open to all of you who want to answer.
Okay. An answer, or kind of an answer to Theodore's question. I think that for me, GDP is not that important, but I know that it's what gives the motivation to the countries to develop and to go on. So for me, it's also a question: do we need GDP, or is there a future where we can live peacefully with each other, like a really utopistic way, with peace with with nature, like a biblical something image, yeah.
Any answers from the other two?
Yes, Theodore. Do we need all this air conditioning right now when it's 20 inside, 20 outside, basically? Or do we need in the winter 25 degrees in our apartments, really? Or do we need an extra 180 kilos of food that we buy every year in addition, while we use the resources for the whole year and we end them in July? So yeah, you were right. There is a lot of cutback that can be done and can be achieved. And I think, but it's only part of the problem, you know that, because the other part is the companies that are driven by profit in the fossil fuel industry, public transportation, public buildings, etc. So it's part of the pizza slice that we need to cut in order to achieve what we want, sustainability, while still having a good, comfortable life. Now, on the businesses, I tend to disagree just a bit. I think businesses motivate people very much to do change. So if you encourage green business, sustainable business, that might be part of a negotiation. In Romania, we have a big problem with regards to waste, municipal waste, waste management, etc. But some people start to see that also as an opportunity for recycling, for upcycling, for circular economy. So it's still good. It's still good that more and more people show an interest in that. Or more people are interested in digitalization of things that used to produce a lot of waste. That's also good. Or many people find an interest in sustainable living, in short chains of agriculture, in good food. That's also good. I mean, the solution can never be, we don't need an economy, obviously. I agree with you on the side of the excesses that the current economy has. Thank you.
Theodore, you should ask more questions. They're very good. Yeah, so like, can we change from within the system? Like the current system, it's set up to do like something very well, and it is successful. So it's successful at making a small amount of people like obscenely wealthy, and like that's it. Like it's doing it great. So like I think what you want to ask is like, is there a system that actually has like a purpose beyond that? And like, do we have a system in mind that can provide rationally for people and for planet? Do we have, so you mentioned kind of like meeting, a study saying, meeting kind of like core needs. So like, what if housing wasn't a luxury? So you mentioned that, people even into their 30s are kind of living with parents. Like, there seems to be like, what would happen if we had water guaranteed instead of, the CEO of Nestle saying that, all water should be privatized? What if we had this, like we could just go on and on. So like, I think what we want to imagine is kind of, it's a political choice to have the system that we have right now. And what we want to ask is more questions like this, saying, why don't we have our current needs provided for? And I think if you looked at we have this like mentality where we'll scrutinize the spending of the poor and the vulnerable, because, we see them as, or we've been conditioned to see them as like less deserving or kind of needing to be thrifty or kind of, existing in a state of charity. But like, what if we scrutinized the spending of the rich and the powerful? Do you really need like an aircraft carrier sized yacht to, go alongside your other yachts? Like that's not a rational use of our planet's resources. And we like live in like the same climate system, the same climate regime. If you're emitting from your private jet, why are we focusing on, whether poor people have like enough heat to get through the window, to get through the winter? So I think that's a really interesting question. So like, I think if we had rationality, we would see a very different system. I think in terms of like going on to the role of business, like how many businesses were crippled or crushed or destroyed by the energy crisis we've just seen? So like, I think one thing that's really interesting is when in times of crisis, we actually see concentration. So, there's like an economic power that maybe could be spread out amongst like lots of kind of businesses that are maybe being like, there's an opportunity that's being used to kind of corner the market in certain places and just like buy cheap when people kind of like are in distress, they can't pay their bills. So like if we have a society or an economy or an energy system that is able to kind of be more fair, more equitable, more people are able to kind of, pursue their dreams and kind of, contribute in the ways that they know how. So, like I'm sure that we would see an economic effect in like an upsurge in jobs, employment, health, wealth, happiness. We'd have like more stuff on our shelves. So like right now we see supply shocks, which are climate related, as well as kind of post-COVID in terms of like gas, which have been exacerbated by war. But like that's leading to inflation, but inflation is fundamentally right now a political form of rationing. And if we didn't have that, what would we see? So is this like something that we're just going to accept going on and going forward. So maybe I've like blurred your two questions together. And then like with concentration of wealth comes concentration of power. And that maybe answers kind of the lobbying kind of question where, you know, if you have a situation where you're like the United States, where like, you know, rail companies can poison a town in East Palestine and then pay 2 million to the Republican Party and then kind of get rules on freight transport kind of like loosened even further still, you know, like there's definitely a problem there. And so like that's something I would hope that we would be able to avoid in the EU.
Thank you very much. I think we touched on a very good point. Well, not really to, or it's not a good point to end the discussion, but to start thinking further and exchanging further, but unfortunately not within this panel constellation, because I'm already receiving signs that we have to end this interesting conversation. I say thank you very much to all of you from my part, but I'm sure also from the audience. So thank you very much for taking your time and sharing your interesting thoughts, ideas, and experiences.